faithfully delivering value by interpreting the world's best books. Hi, this is Sally with Book Talk. Today we're exploring the book Command of the Air, a military work focused on air combat theory. Its author is Italian Army Major General Giulio Douhet, a pioneer of modern air power concepts. Douhet is linked to key military books for each Western branch. For the Army, it's On War. For the Navy, for the Air Force, it's Command of the Air. These three great works. Sea power was harder to write than On War, and air power was even tougher than sea power. Why is that? Because military theory doesn't arise from nothing. It often needs inspiration from war history and combat experience. Clausewitz had many battle examples when writing On War. Mahan had fewer for sea power. With few sea battles to draw from, he had to reference classic land warfare cases to argue naval tactics. But for Douhet writing Command of the Air, there were hardly any air combat cases. He relied on exceptional foresight and vision. There's a fascinating story from when Douhet was 39, serving as an officer in the Italian Army General Staff. In 1908, the French held a flying demonstration in Rome. Crowds gathered, including Douhet. Sadly, strong winds meant the plane barely lifted off, flying only 3 feet high before it ended. What does 3 feet mean? Less than 1 meter. The French weren't showing off. It was downright embarrassing. Italians mocked it, saying the plane was just hopping on the grass. Everyone ridiculed the flight, but Douhet didn't. Instead, he saw what others missed. If airplanes were used in war, they could revolutionize warfare. 12 years later, in 1920, Douhet proudly stated, "When the earliest planes were just hopping around, not real aircraft by today's standards, I began advocating for air power." So, what key insights did Douhet uncover? How should we view this book through the lens of military science today? Now, let's break it down into 3 parts. First, what key predictions did Command of the Air make? Second, what are the blind spots in air power theory? Third, how has air power theory been applied and evolved in modern warfare? All right, let's dive into the first point. The book, Command of the Air, and its major prophecies. During World War I, planes had just started making waves on the battlefield, but before they could really shine, the war wrapped up. Command of the Air, published 3 years after the war, it wasn't about summing up the last conflict or plotting the next one. It was all about charting the future of warfare. That's exactly where this book outshone all other military theories of its era. Douhet laid out a chain of prophecies in the book. First, the sky would become a more crucial battlefield than land or sea. Second, forming independent air forces would be the path every nation took. Third, seizing air superiority would be the key to winning wars. Finally, strategic bombing would force the enemy to surrender outright. Today, these predictions might seem like no big deal, but back then, they were mind-blowing. Let's walk through these 4 prophecies one by one. First up, the sky would be the new battlefield, and way more important than land or sea. Airplanes were invented in 1903. 5 years later, the U.S. got its first military plane. But honestly, the skies were still ruled by balloons and airships. With 0 air battles to go on, Douhet dropped a bombshell theory in 1909. If planes hit the war scene, it'd flip warfare upside down. A whole new military branch, the Air Force, would pop up, with battles raging in the skies. 2 years later, in 1911, planes showed up in combat for the first time, and wouldn't you know it, one side was Douhet's home country. Italy. Back then, Italy sent a plane to scout enemy positions from above and drop some bombs. But the bombs were just 2 kilos, way too puny to do much. Italy's planes didn't impress, and the Americans weren't doing much better either. In 1916, when the U.S. and Mexico had a border clash, the U.S. Army rolled out planes. Turns out, none of them could clear mountains over 3,000 meters high. One plane even got shot down by a Mexican cavalryman with a rifle, and the pilot ended up captured. In World War I, even with more planes in action, their combat style was pretty basic. Take the Battle of the Marne. Both sides had air forces, but mostly just as eyes for ground troops doing recon. Support jobs like artillery spotting, total sidekick stuff, barely in the spotlight. Back then, planes weren't armed. If enemies met midair, pilots would either shake fists or hurl rocks and bricks at each other. But at most, they'd bring pistols for shootouts. Even though planes performed poorly in battle, Douhet reached a conclusion that defied conventional wisdom. The sky would soon become a battlefield. Everyone now recognizes sea power's importance, but in the near future, gaining air superiority would prove even more critical. The sky would emerge as a battlefield equally vital to land and sea. While others focused on ground and ocean, Douhet saw the sky's military value. That's where his genius lay. Notably, Douhet predicted Japan might bomb America, and within 20 years, it happened. With the sky as this lofty, enticing, new battlefield, naturally players would emerge. So Douhet predicted the next inevitable step, creating an independent air force. Douhet argued that air combat outcomes would decide wars, with air forces surpassing armies and navies. Therefore, Douhet insisted an independent air force must be established. Why emphasize independent for the air force? Because Italy's air force was treated like a stepchild, stuck under army logistics with low status. Douhet fought fiercely for it to split off and form its own ministry, equal to army and navy. Douhet stressed air power's importance because it had three unique advantages over armies and navies. First, speed, striking enemy heartlands swiftly. Second, range, operating over wider areas than armies or navies. Third, firepower. Bombs plus poison gas made fearsome weapons deadlier than anything else then. World War I's impenetrable trenches and barbed wire meant nothing to an independent air force. It could bypass enemy lines to bomb vulnerable rear areas relentlessly, forcing surrender. This was beyond armies and navies. The Air Force breaking away was just the first step. Step 2. Get rich to get strong. Money first, then might. With limited military funds, it meant snatching shares from Army and Navy budgets. Douhet argued for funding splits, minimal budgets for Army, Navy, just basic defense, while Air Force got top priority. Even after independence and funding, Douhet pushed further, save extra cash for emergencies. Thus, he advocated building the Air Force's reserve, civil aviation, maintaining both strong defense and civilian industries, impossible for most nations. Douhet's solution bridged this gap perfectly. Peacetime, funnel defense funds into civil aviation as the Air Force's massive reserve. Wartime, instantly militarize aviation. Airports, planes, personnel all deploy. Converting civilian planes to bombers? Simple. Swap passengers or cargo for bombs. Crew transition? Just change into uniforms, hours, not months. With this independent force ready, its purpose, seize air superiority. How to achieve it? Douhet offered two methods. First, air combat, fighters eliminating enemy planes. Second, bombers destroying grounded planes and bases. Air-to-air duels, ideal but unlikely. Skies too vast for random clashes. Simple logic, too much airspace. Fighter groups rarely meet unless they schedule a showdown. So the practical approach, raid enemy turf. Fighters escort bombers to blast grounded targets. Sharp listeners might ask, if skies are vast, couldn't enemies bomb us while we bomb them? Douhet's answer, defense is futile. Absorb their blows while hitting back harder, like soccer without goalkeepers or defenders. All offense. Both sides attack all out. Whoever scores more wins. Douhet champions offense. If you can't wipe out the enemy air force mid-air, go to their base and eliminate them. He gives a vivid analogy. If a rabid dog storms a village, don't guard your door, send hunters to track it down and finish it off. Over 50 years later, a famous war proved Douhet's air superiority theory right. This was the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Both sides aimed for air dominance, but their approaches were polar opposites. The Arab allies used a defensive strategy for air control. combining air power, SAMs, and AA guns to shield ground forces in key zones. Israel's Air Force did the opposite, aggressively striking to seize total air dominance. In 2 weeks, Israel bound over 230 enemy planes and dozens of SAM sites, losing just 40 seconds, securing air control and crushing the enemy. Once air superiority is won, your Air Force can operate freely, no holds barred. So what's the next crucial step? It's strategic bombing to wipe out the enemy. Douhet saw strategic bombing as the vital next move after air dominance. Douhet stressed bombing not just war industries but civilian centers to crush their economy and morale. Eventually, even with armies intact, civilians will yield and demand surrender from lack of protection. To prove this, Douhet cited WW1 Germany. The army was still strong when they surrendered. So why did Germany give up? Because their people felt they couldn't hold out any longer. Um, Douhet's push for bomber-based strategic bombing was highly valuable. In World War II, two powers dismissed Douhet's ideas and paid a steep price: Germany and the Soviet Union. Pre-WW1, Germany built a fast-growing air force, but it was tactical-focused. So they mass-produced dive bombers to support ground troops. In the early days of 221, Germany was on the strategic offensive, with tight air-ground coordination that crushed opponents. But when the war shifted to a stalemate, major flaws in Germany's air force structure came to light. A severe shortage of heavy bombers for strategic missions meant Germany couldn't gain air control over the Channel in the Battle of Britain or retaliate against British bombings, costing them dearly due to neglecting strategic bombing. Similarly, the Soviet Union stumbled on this issue too. Like the Germans, the Soviets focused on frontline air superiority, but severely underused air power strategically. Famous Soviet Marshal Timoshenko believed Air Force impact wasn't in deep rear areas, but in joint operations against battlefield enemies at division and army group levels. Only after heavy army casualties did they grasp strategic bombing's importance. But it was too late. Stalin deeply regretted it, saying, "For some reason, we didn't form bomber aviation. In a way, we ignored this." Yet, the prophecy of strategic bombing only became reality after the Gulf War in the late 20th century, reviving Douhet's fame. This was due to precision-guided weapons emerging and bomb power surging by the century's end. For instance, a 211 B-17 bomber needed 4,500 sorties and 9,000 bombs to achieve an effect that an F-117 could do in one Kosovo war mission with just one bomb. If Nazi Germany had such tech in 221, history might have changed. All right, that's the 4 key prophecies from Command of the Air covered. And in short, it's about nations building independent air forces, launching air offensives, destroying enemy forces, then strategic bombing the enemy state, ultimately forcing surrender. But Command of the Air was written without air combat experience. Douhet's theories were based on logic and imagination, and real war couldn't follow his predictions exactly. So the book has inevitable blind spots, with at least 3 worth noting. The first blind spot: air forces should only attack, never defend. To Douhet, the sky had no natural defenses. Air forces must never be used defensively. His logic: as defenders, you never know when or where enemy planes will strike, forcing you to guard everywhere. To defend successfully, every point must outmatch the attacker's force. So Douhet concluded, if each defense point exceeds the enemy, collectively they'd massively overpower them, so why defend? Attack instead. Just attack, attack, attack. But 211 proved him wrong. Soviet air defense at Moscow was so effective, it led to dedicated anti-air units. Today, radar and AWACS make targeted air defense possible. Second blind spot: no distinction between military and civilian targets. To win, Douhet advocated relentless bombing of both until surrender. He believed war is inherently inhumane. Its goal is maximum enemy harm, so all means are justified. Any method works, ignore hypocritical war-limiting laws. To maximize damage, he openly endorsed superweapons. His superweapon, planes plus poison gas. To Douhet, this combo outmatched any weapon. Example, 80 to 100 tons of gas could blanket London or Paris. Bombs start fires. Gas prevents firefighting. To break enemy resolve, he bluntly advised, civilian targets are better than military ones. In his words, better to destroy Paris, France's heart, than its 56 air bases. Today, massive civilian bombing sometimes fails. In Afghanistan, indiscriminate bombing without strong central government didn't break will, it became slaughter, burdening soldiers morally and trapping governments. This is played out in multiple U.S. military operations. The third blind spot, armies and navies shouldn't have their own air wings. What happens when armies and navies build their own air units? Douhet described it in 3 words. First, useless. Second, redundant. Third, harmful and pointless. Why useless? Because without air superiority, Army-Navy air wings can't operate. Why redundant? If you gain air control, the independent Air Force handles those missions. Army and Navy become irrelevant. Why harmful? Better to consolidate planes into one Air Force to seize air control than scatter them across services. Douhet's reasoning seemed sound, but reality proved him wrong. Both 2WE and modern wars since the 90s disproved his theory. In World War II, Britain's Navy challenged Japan without air cover and got wiped out. Late 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor and rampaged through Southeast Asia. Churchill sent the Eastern Fleet to counter Japan and protect colonies, aiming for a naval showdown. They hoped to teach Japan a lesson, but were destroyed in 3 days, utterly defenseless. Admiral Phillips died at sea. Why couldn't British ships counter Japanese planes? If 201 feels distant and Britain's military not top tier, take the U.S. Their Army, Navy, air wings have such diverse planes they can wage major air campaigns independently. We'll stop here on Douhet's 3 air power blind spots. After all, judging a century-old theory by 21st century standards, no need to be harsh. Planes were just scouts back then, spotting enemies for ground troops to eliminate. Now, roles reversed. Ground forces call in airstrikes to handle tough targets. If Douhet were alive today, he'd refine his air power theory, specifically changing one word, from command of the air to command of space. And looking up at the blue sky, Douhet saw nothing beyond, not outer space, nor the electromagnetic domain within it. In the air supremacy era, one AWACS monitored hundreds of square kilometers. In the space supremacy era, 24 space-based radars watch any Earth location 24/7. Planes evolved from target spotters to armed platforms. Similarly, today's satellites provide positioning data while evolving into weapon-launching platforms. Star Wars-like programs may become future air combat, a new battlefield for space dominance. As early as 2001, the U.S. military exercised scenarios simulating satellite destruction. With 6 to 10 satellites lost, how should we respond? This tests air power theory's adaptability. Second, dominating the electronic domain. Losing it means defeat, no matter how formidable you appear. Against the U.S., Saddam's capable Air Force, with advanced jets, hid underground, contributing nothing to Iraq's defense. U.S. info warfare disabled Iraq's microwave relays, phone switches, fiber optics, and comm centers. Their air force, cut off from commands and intel, was grounded, reduced to infantry. Clearly, air power still has room to evolve in modern warfare tech. To close, Douhet's timeless words. Victory smiles upon those who anticipate changes in war's character, not those who wait to adapt. In this era of rapid war evolution, pioneers gain immeasurable advantages by overcoming old methods with new ones. All right, command of the air. That's our take on this book. Find notes below the audio. See you tomorrow.